Amid the bustling streets and towering buildings of New York, some marketplaces are no longer alive with the chatter of merchants and the clatter of carts. By day, they appear quiet, the stalls abandoned, and the cobblestones cracked and worn. By night, the air shifts. And the whispers of those long gone rise from beneath the floors, carrying tales of lost merchants, sudden tragedies, and restless spirits. Visitors report seeing figures moving among the empty stalls. Ghostly hands reaching for unseen wares. Shadows that twist and glide along walls unnaturally. Some swear the very air vibrates with echoes of bargaining laughter and cries from centuries past. A few who linger too long say that the marketplaces themselves seem alive, groaning beneath the weight of memory, their foundations echoing the footsteps of the dead. Tonight, my dear friend, we will step into these haunted historic marketplaces. We will wander along the empty aisles, peek into shadowed stalls, and listen to whispers carried through the night. We will uncover the most haunted historic marketplaces in New York, where every stall, every archway, and every cobblestone holds a story. And the restless refuse to leave. So tell me, if you were walking alone through a marketplace at midnight, and a pale figure appeared among the empty stalls, staring silently. Would you approach to see who it is, or would you retreat toward the safety of the street before the shadows reach you? Hello, my dear friend. I am so glad you are here tonight, safe and warm, because the marketplaces we are about to explore are not for the faint of heart. New York's historic marketplaces were once alive with life, bustling with merchants, shoppers, and travelers. Over the decades, some were abandoned, left to decay, or forgotten under the shadows of modern buildings. Yet the history remains. Visitors report shadows moving along cobblestone paths, figures appearing and disappearing in the stalls, and lights flickering where no electricity exists. Some have felt cold hands brush their arms or shoulders. Others have heard whispers, faint laughter, or soft cries carried through the silent corridors. The air within these marketplaces at night is heavy, thick with fog, dust, and memory. Shadows twist unnaturally along arches and corridors. Some have seen lanterns floating above empty stalls. Others have felt the presence of unseen watchers pacing silently beside them. Before we explore these haunted historic marketplaces together, my friend, I want to ask you something. And I hope you will answer it in the comments. If you were alone in a marketplace at midnight, and you heard your name whispered from an empty stall, would you step closer to see who is calling? Or would you leave immediately, hoping the spirit lets you go? Take a deep breath. Steady your heartbeat. And let us explore the most haunted historic marketplaces in New York. Blackstone Market lies abandoned along a narrow strip of cobblestones, each stone cracked and worn by years of neglect. The stalls that once offered fresh produce, textiles, and wares stand empty, their wooden frames weathered and splintered. Rusted hinges creak in the wind, and peeling paint flaps softly against supports. By day, the market is silent, the streets empty, and the air carries only the scent of aged wood, damp stone, and the faint tang of the nearby river. The alleys between stalls twist and turn, creating narrow passages that wind through the remnants of the once bustling marketplace. Shadows gather along the edges, pooling in the corners of broken carts and abandoned crates. The layout of the market feels confined yet open, the architecture forcing visitors to move carefully as they navigate the uneven cobblestones. During daylight hours, Blackstone Market feels frozen in time. The quiet is heavy, the kind that presses against the ears and slows perception. A gentle breeze shifts dust along the ground, lifting the smell of old stone and wood into the air. Lifting the smell of old stone and wood into the air. There is a sense that the market is holding its breath, waiting for a moment that will never arrive. As evening approaches, the atmosphere begins to shift. Shadows lengthen along the cobblestones and wrap around the stalls. Shadows lengthen along the cobblestones and wrap around the stalls. The light from the setting sun disappears quickly, leaving alleyways deep in darkness. Leaving alleyways deep in darkness. Even familiar paths seem unfamiliar, the cracks and broken planks blending into pools of shadow. The cracks and broken planks blending into pools of shadow. Night transforms Blackstone Market into a space that feels alive despite the absence of people. Figures begin to appear, moving silently among the stalls. They are first glimpsed along the alleys, upright and human in shape but lacking detail. Faces, clothing, and distinguishing features are absent, leaving only the impression of presence and motion. Leaving only the impression of presence and motion. These figures pace along the cobblestones and wind through alleyways with measured, deliberate steps. Some linger near stalls, pausing at corners or entrances before continuing. Others move continuously, following the layout of the market in ways that seem natural yet unexplainable. They do not approach visitors directly but remain aware of any presence, moving in patterns that suggest memory rather than intent. When observers focus on them, the figures often fade into the shadows. Looking away and then back may reveal them farther along, retracing paths or pacing silently elsewhere in the alleys. They remain tethered to the structure of the market, never wandering beyond its boundaries. Lanterns appear intermittently along the alleys. Small points of light flicker softly, illuminating a few feet of the cobblestones before dimming and vanishing. No hand or holder is visible, and the light seems to move with purpose, tracing lines along pathways and corners as if guiding unseen figures. The flickering lanterns do not behave like ordinary sources of light. They pulse and swing without wind, casting shifting shadows that interact with the environment naturally. Moving toward the lanterns does not reveal their source. They appear and disappear, leaving only the glow behind. Visitors often report faint sounds accompanying the figures and lanterns. Footsteps echo across the cobblestones, soft but consistent, as though someone is pacing calmly among the stalls. Whispers can also be heard, carried softly through the alleys. Names are called faintly, fragments of conversation drift across corners. But no coherent sentences are formed. The whispers seem directed at visitors, yet they carry no threat. They rise and fall, appearing and vanishing unpredictably. Blending with the wind and shifting shadows. Historical accounts indicate that Blackstone Market was once a vibrant hub of trade and interaction. Stalls were lined with goods, and the cobblestones carried the steady rhythm of daily commerce. Long before abandonment, night patrols and late-night visitors were common. The sound of footsteps, the movement of merchants, and the flicker of lanterns would have been constant companions in the market. Many believe that the nighttime activity reflects these past routines. Figures trace paths once walked. Footsteps echo movements embedded in the stones. Lanterns replicate light once carried by merchants, and whispers echo fragments of speech long since lost. The market appears to replay these patterns, preserving memory within its structure. Sound behaves unpredictably among the stalls and alleys. Echoes can distort distance, making footsteps appear nearer or farther than they are. Shadows deepen, masking movement. Whispers shift with the wind, sometimes seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Photographs show empty alleys and dimly lit stalls. Video footage may reveal shadows or shifting light, but figures remain indistinct. Audio recordings pick up footsteps or whispers, yet the sources remain impossible to identify fully. Time perception is altered at night in the market. Without daylight, minutes stretch or compress unpredictably. Extended silence feels prolonged, and exiting the alleys can feel abrupt, leaving the contained, layered environment of the market for open streets or shorelines beyond. As night progresses, activity diminishes. Figures appear less frequently, footsteps grow softer, and lanterns flicker more sporadically. The market gradually returns to stillness, its cobblestones empty, and stalls silent. By morning, Blackstone Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates cracks in the stones. And empty stalls cast long shadows. No evidence remains of figures, footsteps, or flickering lanterns from the night before. Visitors often carry lasting impressions. Shadows pacing along narrow alleys. Footsteps echoing over cracked cobblestones. Lanterns flickering with no one holding them. And whispers carried softly through the night. Blackstone Market does not feel hostile or welcoming. It feels alive through memory and repetition. By day, it rests quietly. By night, it becomes a stage for echoes of movement, light, and sound. Tracing patterns left by those who walked its alleys long ago. When morning returns, the market settles into stillness. Holding its stalls, pathways, and shadows, waiting patiently for darkness to return. Allowing figures, footsteps, and lanterns to pass through once more. Widowa's Row Market sits at the edge of a quiet town, a long, narrow row of stone and wood stalls that have been abandoned for decades. The roof is partially collapsed in places, and weeds push through cracks in the cobblestone floor. Wooden beams sag under the weight of years, and dust coats every surface. From a distance, the market seems ordinary, yet its history carries a weight that lingers in the air. The market earned its name from a merchant who vanished without explanation decades ago. Shoppers and vendors once filled the corridors with movement and sound. One day, a merchant entered the market and was never seen again. Belongings remained, stalls remained stocked, yet no trace of the person could be found. Over time, the market became silent, yet the absence of life seemed to leave a persistent imprint on the space. During the day, Widow's Row Market feels desolate but unthreatening. Sunlight filters through broken windows and gaps in the roof, casting irregular patterns across the dusty floors. The air is heavy with the scent of old wood and stone. Small birds occasionally flutter in and out, adding faint movement, but the stillness dominates. Shadows stretch long and uneven, wrapping around the empty stalls and archways, giving corners a depth that feels almost alive. The corridors wind between rows of stalls, narrow and uneven. Floorboards creak beneath the lightest step, and stones shift underfoot. Dust rises with movement, forming ephemeral clouds that hang in the dim light. Every corner hides shapes that appear briefly, twisting and blending into shadow. Even the simplest step feels amplified, as though the space itself is aware of each visitor. As evening approaches, the atmosphere begins to shift. Light fades quickly, leaving the corridors in muted tones. The air grows cooler, carrying faint drafts that stir dust and loose papers. Shadows deepen, stretching unnaturally across walls and floors. The market seems to breathe in the fading light, holding its silence tightly as though waiting. It is during this time that figures are first noticed. They appear among the stalls, partially obscured by shadows and broken structures. Human in outline but lacking clear features, they move slowly, pacing along the corridors or crouching behind counters. They move slowly, pacing along the corridors or crouching behind counters. They remain motionless at times, observing the space, only to continue gliding silently when unobserved. They remain motionless at times, observing the space, only to continue gliding silently when unobserved. When attention is drawn to them, they sometimes fade into shadow, only to reappear farther along, maintaining the same deliberate paths. Alongside these visual impressions, sounds emerge. Soft cries drift through the market, distant yet persistent. They rise and fall unpredictably, echoing between stone walls and wooden beams. Whispers thread along corridors, fragmented and indistinct, moving from stall to stall. The combination of cries and whispers creates a sensation of presence, subtle yet undeniable. The source of the sounds is elusive. Cries may seem to come from one corner, only to vanish moments later and reappear across the aisle. Whispers pass from one end of the corridor to another, as though the space itself carries memory. Researchers studying abandoned markets and similar structures note that sound and perception can be distorted in enclosed spaces. Acoustic reflections, uneven surfaces, and drafts can carry and modify noise. Shadows can appear to move with minimal light. While these factors explain some effects, they do not fully account for the consistency of figure sightings and repeated auditory phenomena reported over decades. The figures and sounds follow patterns. They appear most frequently in the evening or under low-light conditions. Pacing along corridors repeats in a similar rhythm. Cries and whispers recur under similar circumstances. These repetitions suggest the market itself retains traces of past presence. Some believe the market holds memory. Years of human activity, routines, and absence may have left residual impressions. The figures may represent gestures frozen in time. The cries and whispers may be echoes of voices that once moved through the corridors, subtly preserved by the space. Others point to the interplay between architecture and decay. Stone, wood, and collapsed structures create unique acoustics and visual distortions. Dust, broken boards, and lingering drafts amplify the sensation of movement and sound. The market becomes more than a building, it becomes a container for perception and memory. Visitors often describe heightened awareness. Time feels slower. Distances are distorted. Every step, shadow, and sound carries significance. As night deepens, activity gradually diminishes. Cries fade, blending with the creaks of wood and the movement of wind through gaps in the walls. Whispers thin and drift into silence. The market seems to settle, returning to quiet, though never fully empty. By morning, Widow's Row Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates the stalls and corridors. Dust floats in the air. Shadows shrink. The cries and whispers vanish. The space is still, yet those who leave often carry a lingering impression. Not of fear, but awareness. The market retains memory. Figures may still pace silently among stalls. Cries and whispers may still drift through corridors. Widow's Row Market does not demand belief. It stands quietly, shaped by history, human presence, and time. When darkness falls, it reveals subtle motion and sound, a quiet continuation of what has always existed. Among the empty stalls, figures still appear. Through the corridors, cries and whispers continue to drift. And when daylight returns, the market releases its hold, standing silent once more, holding memory, presence, and quiet echoes for those willing to notice. Ashen Alley Market stretches along a narrow lane, its stalls weathered by years of sun, wind, and rain. Wooden frames lean slightly, their surfaces cracked and darkened with age. Canvas coverings sag, torn in places. And the stone pathway beneath is uneven, worn smooth in some areas, jagged in others. Moss and small plants push through the cracks between stones, claiming the spaces that have long been abandoned. The air carries the faint scent of dust, wood, and lingering moisture, thickened by shadowed corners where sunlight struggles to reach. As visitors step into the alley, a quiet tension settles around them. The market is silent now, emptied of vendors and crowds. The echoes of footsteps bounce off stone walls and old timber. The air feels colder here, moving sluggishly between stalls. Every corner holds darkness, deep and patient, hiding spaces that seem to shift when viewed indirectly. It is in these shadowed corners that figures begin to appear. They crouch low, pressed against walls or tucked beneath the edges of stalls. Their outlines are human but indistinct, softened by shadow and distance. They remain still, observing without movement, their presence marked only by the subtle disturbance of air or the flicker of shadow. When approached, they do not rise or advance. When attention drifts, they reassert their position, returning to the corner from which they emerged. Visitors often feel the presence of these figures before they see them. A cold brush traces along the arm. Fingers press briefly against a forearm or shoulder. A chill that spreads slowly before fading. The touch is fleeting yet unmistakable, deliberate rather than accidental. It does not resemble moisture or wind. It feels intentional, as if the alley itself acknowledges the presence of another being. Turning reveals empty stone and wood. The figures remain hidden in corners. The sensation of touch lingers, spreading faintly before fading completely. As visitors move further along the alley, the brushes repeat. A light pass along the wrist. A fleeting touch near the elbow. The chill is brief, precise, and restrained. The alley itself seems alive with memory. Shadows shift subtly even without wind. Old canvas flaps sway slightly. Dust rises in soft patterns from the stone floor. Every creaking board and settling timber seems responsive to the presence of visitors. The market holds echoes of the past, movements and routines long gone, preserved in corners, shadows, and textures. Ashen Alley Market was once bustling. Merchants displayed goods on wooden tables. Children ran between stalls. And the air carried voices, laughter, and the sound of coins. Paths were narrow, crowded, and alive with motion. When the market was abandoned, the structures remained, absorbing the memory of movement, observation, and presence. Today, the shadows and figures are remnants of that history, echoes replayed silently among the stalls. Figures appear more frequently along the alley. They crouch in multiple corners, moving subtly within shadow. Cold brushes become noticeable, especially near edges of tables and low walls. Fingers graze arms or shoulders, brief and deliberate, never aggressive. The alley seems aware of movement, acknowledging it without interference. Despite the unease, the atmosphere remains controlled. Figures do not approach directly. Touches do not intensify. Shadows shift but do not overwhelm. Every movement unfolds slowly, deliberately, as though guided by an unseen rhythm embedded in the structures themselves. Those who pause notice a subtle shift. The brushes of cold fade. Figures press deeper into corners, blending more fully with shadow. Dust settles. Canvas flaps hang still. Silence deepens, patient and attentive. The alley waits, observing quietly without action. When movement resumes, activity returns. Figures glide subtly between corners. Cold brushes occur along exposed skin. Shadows drift independently of walls and stalls. The market seems alive with memory and motion, repeating routines long abandoned. Attempts to document these phenomena have produced limited results. Photographs capture empty stalls and vague shadows. Video records show faint movement in corners and occasional flickers of form, impossible to focus. Audio captures only distant echoes, settling wood, and the faint hum of wind through cracks. Environmental explanations suggest low light, narrow spaces, and old structures enhance perception. Shadows and dust may create visual effects. These factors explain some experiences but not the precision, repetition, or deliberate nature of touches and figures. As night reaches its quietest hours, activity diminishes. Figures retreat into shadow. Cold brushes cease. The alley returns to stillness. Dust settles. Canvas hangs motionless. Only the sound of distant wind and occasional creaking wood remains. By morning, Ashen Alley Market appears unchanged. Sunlight filters through gaps between stalls. illuminating worn wood and stone. Shadows retreat. Figures no longer appear. Touches have vanished. The alley feels ordinary, quiet, and abandoned. Visitors leaving often pause at the edge of the lane, glancing back at the narrow alley. It appears ordinary, unremarkable. Yet those who walked the alley at night remember clearly. Figures crouch in corners. Cold hands brushing lightly against arms. Shadows shifting independently. The echo of presence lingering in empty space. Ashen Alley Market remains shaped by time, memory, and shadow. By day, it is silent and still. By night, when darkness settles and shadows gather, the alley becomes something else. Figures return to crouched positions. Cold hands brush lightly along passing arms. Shadows drift independently. And for a brief time, the market remembers the presence it once contained. Before retreating again into shadow and stillness. Hollow Court Market lies tucked beneath an old stone archway connecting two narrow streets. From above, it seems like an ordinary passage, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and lined with crumbling walls. Yet those who step beneath the arch feel a subtle shift in the air. The sound of the city above fades almost instantly, replaced by a quiet that is heavy and deliberate. Shadows stretch along the alleyways, gliding without source, moving in ways that defy ordinary perception. The market is narrow and winding, cobbled paths lined with stalls that once held goods, now empty and silent. As the sun begins to set, Hollow Court Market begins to reveal its hidden character. Shadows glide silently along the alleys, stretching across the cobblestones and climbing the walls. Soon, it becomes impossible to ignore, the darkness flowing along the paths in smooth, deliberate motion. Lanterns appear, swinging gently without hand or rope. Soft points of light illuminate the stalls and walls, casting long, flickering shadows along the cobblestones. The lanterns move without support, drifting along the market and swinging slowly as though caught in a wind that cannot be felt. Visitors are drawn to follow them, guided deeper into the maze of alleys, yet the lights do not hurry or obstruct. They move with quiet purpose, highlighting corners and passages that seem forgotten by the city above. The market exudes a sense of watchfulness. Figures are glimpsed between arches and behind stalls, pale and indistinct, standing still or pacing slowly. They do not approach, speak, or react, looking directly at them causes them to blur, fading into the shadows. Glancing away allows them to linger, moving along paths as if tracing patterns embedded in the stones themselves. The air carries a subtle hum, almost like distant murmurs. Footsteps echo softly along the alleys, sometimes perfectly matching those of visitors, sometimes falling slightly behind. Whispers drift through the passageways, low and indistinct, weaving around walls and corners. Occasionally, faint laughter rises, distant and fleeting, never aggressive, only perceptible enough to remind one that the market is alive with echoes of its past. Historical records suggest that Hollow Court Market was once a vibrant space. Merchants lined the alleys with stalls of cloth, spices, and trinkets. The archway marked a crossroads between neighborhoods, bustling with activity. Over time, the market was abandoned. The city above changed, streets shifted, and the arches were left to shadow and stone. Locals whisper that the movement of people, their voices, and footsteps remain imprinted in the passage. Visitors who linger often notice a distortion of perception. Alleyways seem longer than they should. Corners appear to shift. Shadows bend and stretch independently. Lanterns drift closer or farther, sometimes circling before continuing. Figures reappear at intervals, pacing silently along paths where none should be. The echoes of footsteps and whispers follow precisely, marking each movement without touching or harming. One visitor described walking beneath the central arch as a lantern floated ahead. A pale figure stood behind a collapsed stall, motionless. The visitor felt a fleeting brush against the shoulder, cool and light. Turning revealed only empty stalls and quiet alleys. Moments later, the figure had vanished, and the lantern drifted onward, illuminating the path ahead. Another account tells of a small group exploring the deeper alleys. Lanterns appeared above their heads, floating along the passages. Figures stood silently between arches. Shadows moved independently, brushing past without sound. Footsteps echoed behind the group, synchronized with their pace. Whispers carried through the arches, circling the group. Each person felt the presence beside them, fleeting and intangible, aware but not threatening. Despite its eerie nature, Hollow Court Market does not feel hostile. Figures do not pursue. Shadows do not strike. Lanterns do not mislead aggressively. The tension arises from awareness rather than danger. The lanterns slow their movement, hovering before fading into darkness. Figures appear less frequently and vanish faster. Shadows settle along walls and arches. Footsteps and whispers retreat, leaving only the quiet hum of the city above and the stillness of the market below. By morning, Hollow Court Market returns to calm. Sunlight filters through the archway, illuminating the cobblestones. Stalls appear empty and still. Shadows fall naturally. Lanterns and figures are gone. The market rests, silent and undisturbed. Waiting for night to return and awaken its hidden echoes once more. Hollow Court Market exists where history, stone, and memory converge. Shadows glide silently along the alleys. Lanterns swing without source. Figures appear and vanish. Footsteps, whispers, and faint laughter mark the presence of those long gone. The market does not demand belief. It simply observes, guiding and echoing every step of those who pass beneath its arches. Bloodstone Market sits in quiet desolation, its cracked cobblestone stretching between rows of abandoned stalls. The fire that consumed much of the market in the 1800s left behind charred timber, warped iron, and lingering echoes of tragedy. By day, the market appears frozen in time. Sunlight glints off broken metal and dust-covered surfaces, casting fractured shadows along pathways that were once crowded with merchants and shoppers. The air carries the faint scent of aged wood, stone, and lingering smoke, a reminder of the catastrophe that claimed the lives of many who once walked these alleys. The alleyways between stalls are narrow and winding. Each step on the cobblestones produces a soft, uneven echo, muted quickly by the stillness of the market. Wooden crates, toppled carts, and fragments of metal line the paths, evidence of sudden abandonment. Despite its quiet, there is an unmistakable tension in the air, a sense that the market is not entirely empty, even in daylight. As evening approaches, shadows deepen across the cobblestones and lean along the remains of wooden stalls. The setting sun casts a muted glow through broken beams and tattered awnings. Air becomes cooler, heavier, carrying faint scents of smoke, ash, and the surrounding river. Night transforms Bloodstone Market entirely. The alleys are dark, and the shadows between stalls stretch into the corners. Figures begin to appear, rising slowly from the floors and corners, moving along the pathways that once thrived with life. Observers describe upright forms, human in outline, emerging without detail. Their presence is defined by motion, subtle yet unmistakable. Some figures appear near the remnants of burned stalls, others along the cracked pathways, pacing slowly and deliberately. These figures do not approach visitors. They maintain distance, moving with purpose along the market's old layout. Some linger near doorways or corners, pausing before continuing along alleyways that twist and turn between broken stalls. Their movement follows a pattern, as if retracing actions performed long ago. When attention is focused on them, the figures often fade into shadow. Looking away and back may reveal them elsewhere, continuing along the market paths. They remain bound to the market, moving along the spaces where life once thrived, never venturing beyond its boundaries. Lanterns appear intermittently throughout the alleys. Points of faint light flicker above cobblestones, illuminating a few feet of path before dimming or disappearing entirely. No hand or holder is visible, and the light seems to move deliberately, tracing routes along alleyways and burned stalls. The rhythm is calm and measured, passing along pathways and through alleyways without deviation. Sometimes multiple sets of footsteps are heard simultaneously, but the paths they take remain elusive. Whispers are also reported. Names and fragmented phrases float softly through the alleyways, carried by the still night air. The voices are faint, never forming full sentences, creating the sense of being observed without threat. Historical accounts detail the tragic fire that consumed the market in the 1800s. The blaze spread quickly, trapping merchants and shoppers inside stalls that once brimmed with goods. The market was abandoned afterward, left to decay and bear witness to the past. Many believe that the nighttime figures, footsteps, and whispers are echoes of the people who perished, replaying the final moments of their lives in the space they once inhabited. Despite the unsettling phenomena, the market does not feel threatening. Figures maintain distance. Footsteps remain soft. Whispers are quiet and measured. The experience is observational, a sense of witnessing history replayed rather than being pursued. Sound behaves unpredictably within the alleyways. Echoes distort distance and direction, making footsteps seem closer or farther than they are. Whispers shift subtly with the wind, appearing from one side of the alley and then another. The broken architecture amplifies or dampens sound, creating a layered, immersive atmosphere. Attempts to document these occurrences are rarely successful. Photographs capture empty stalls and shadows. Video footage may show movement among burned structures or faint glows from lanterns. But figures remain indistinct. Time perception is altered in Bloodstone Market at night. Without daylight or familiar cues, minutes stretch and compress unpredictably. Extended periods of silence feel heavy. And moving through the alleys can feel like shifting through both space and memory. Exiting the market produces a sudden transition, returning the observer to the ordinary world outside. As the night progresses, activity diminishes. Figures appear less frequently, footsteps soften, and whispers fade. The alleys gradually return to stillness. The market rests silently among its broken stalls and cracked cobblestones. The memory of tragedy and movement held quietly in place. At sunrise, Bloodstone Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates charred wood, stone, and abandoned pathways. No visible sign remains of figures, footsteps, or lanterns from the night before. Only the lingering impression carried by those who experienced it. Visitors often describe lasting images: shadows pacing among the stalls, soft footsteps echoing across cobblestones, lanterns flickering with no one holding them, and faint whispers drifting through the night air. Bloodstone Market does not feel hostile or welcoming. It exists through memory and repetition, holding traces of the past. By day, it rests silently among charred stalls and broken paths. By night, it becomes a stage for figures, footsteps, and whispers, replaying patterns left by those who walked its alleys long ago. When daylight returns fully, the market settles into stillness, waiting patiently for darkness, to allow figures, whispers, and lanterns to move through the cobblestone alleys again. Mistvale Market stretches across narrow stone floors, its stalls long abandoned and worn by weather and time. Fog drifts slowly along the uneven ground, curling around wooden frames and stone foundations, softening edges and muting sound. The air is cool and heavy, carrying the faint scent of moss, damp wood, and lingering dust. Shadows gather beneath the sagging stalls, stretching across pathways that twist and narrow between rows of empty tables and crumbling walls. As visitors step onto the market floors, the atmosphere shifts. The echoes of footsteps sound louder in the still air, only to be swallowed quickly by the surrounding fog. Every movement feels amplified, yet distant. The fog moves in subtle currents, following the steps of those who walk through, curling around ankles and along edges of the stalls. It is in this mist that figures begin to appear. They emerge gradually, half hidden among the stalls, crouched low or leaning slightly against wooden supports. Their outlines are human in shape but indistinct, softened by fog and darkness. When attention shifts, they reassert their presence, returning to the shadows they inhabit. Visitors often sense the figures before seeing them. A cold brush grazes the arm. Fingers pass lightly along a forearm or shoulder, brief and precise. The chill spreads slowly before fading, unmistakable in its clarity. It does not resemble moisture from the fog or the movement of air. It feels deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement of presence within the market. Turning reveals empty floors. The sensation lingers, fading gradually as footsteps continue along the stone. As visitors move further, the brushes repeat. A touch along the wrist. A fleeting pass near the elbow. The sensation is restrained, consistent, never aggressive. The market itself seems alive with memory. Shadows shift without wind. Fog curls along stalls and stones. Dust rises faintly from the floor. The environment responds subtly to movement, preserving echoes of footsteps, gestures, and presence. Every creak of timber and settling stone carries the impression of past activity. The space holds routines long abandoned, replayed silently through fog and shadow. Mistvale Market was once bustling. Merchants displayed goods on wooden tables. Voices called across narrow lanes. Laughter echoed, and footsteps moved with constant rhythm. Paths wound between stalls, crowded and alive with motion. When the market was abandoned, the structures remained, absorbing memory of activity and presence. As night deepens, activity increases. Figures appear more frequently along the aisles, gliding silently between stalls. Their movement is smooth, deliberate, and soundless. The eyes do not blink or shift rapidly. Despite the eerie sensations, the atmosphere is not hostile. When fog thickens, the glow dims slightly. When it thins, the eyes return with calm consistency. Figures do not advance aggressively. The brushes remain brief. The cold brushes fade. Figures press deeper into shadows. Fog curls more densely around corners and stalls. Silence deepens, patient and balanced. The market seems to wait, observing quietly without motion. When movement resumes, activity returns. Figures glide silently along the aisles once more. Cold brushes occur along exposed skin. Pale eyes glow softly through mist. Shadows drift independently of walls and stalls. The market seems alive with memory and motion, replaying routines long abandoned. Attempts to document these experiences have produced limited clarity. Photographs capture fog and shadow but fail to define figures. Video footage shows drifting movement and faint glowing points that vanish when approached. Audio captures only ambient sounds, faint echoes, settling timber, and the soft hum of the environment. Environmental explanations suggest low light, fog, and damp stone enhance perception. Shadows and mist may create visual distortions. These explanations account for some sensations but not the precision, repetition, and deliberate nature of figures, touches, and glowing eyes. As night reaches its quietest hours, activity gradually diminishes. Figures fade into mist and shadow. Cold brushes cease. Pale eyes disappear. Fog lifts slightly, drifting toward corners and crevices. The market returns to stillness, holding only faint ambient sounds. By morning, Mistvale Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates worn stone floors and weathered wooden stalls. Visitors leaving often pause at the edges of the aisles, glancing back. The market seems calm, unremarkable. Yet those who walked the stalls at night remember clearly. Figures gliding silently between stalls. Pale eyes glowing softly through mist. Cold hands brushing lightly along skin. The sensation of being acknowledged by the space itself. Mistvale Market remains, shaped by fog, memory, and time. By day, it is silent and ordinary. By night, when fog drifts and shadows deepen, it becomes something else. Figures return to glide between stalls. Pale eyes glow softly. Unseen hands brush lightly along passing arms. And for a brief time, the market remembers the presence it once contained before retreating again into shadow and stillness. Shadowbank Market lies nestled within a narrow alley, enclosed by high, weathered walls that rise on either side. Sunlight rarely reaches the cobblestones, filtering instead through small gaps and overhead beams, casting long, shifting shadows along the passage. The air is thick with the scent of old stone, faint traces of spices and wood, and the subtle dampness of alleys untouched for years. From the moment visitors step inside, the alley feels separate from the city beyond, quiet yet alive with a presence that is not immediately seen. The market itself is narrow, the paths winding between long-abandoned stalls and covered walkways. Cobblestones are uneven, worn smooth by footsteps that have long since ceased. Shadows gather in corners and along walls, stretching and moving as light fades. Even in daylight, the atmosphere is heavy, as if the space remembers the bustle of the market when it was once filled with merchants, buyers, and the hum of activity. As evening falls, the market reveals its true character. Figures begin to appear, pacing along the narrow paths. They move silently, their forms pale and indistinct, softened by the shadows of walls and alleyways. They do not approach visitors, do not speak, do not acknowledge those who pass. Their steps are deliberate, following routes invisible to the eye, turning at corners and reappearing along stretches of cobblestone without explanation. Observers notice that looking directly at them often causes the figures to fade, while glancing away allows them to persist. Visitors often feel a presence brushing past them. The sensation is subtle and fleeting, light against the shoulder or along the arm, never lingering long enough to cause alarm. Turning reveals empty alleyways, walls, and worn stalls, yet the feeling persists, as if the market itself is aware of every step and breath. Lanterns appear along the alley, swinging without hand or tether. Their glow is soft, warm, and constant, illuminating corners, stalls, and cobblestones in an otherworldly light. The lanterns move slowly, floating above the pathways, drifting along the alleys as if tracing invisible routes. They cast long shadows that shift and sway across walls, blending seamlessly with the dark figures that pace silently beneath them. Visitors are drawn to follow the lights, moving deeper into the market, guided by their steady presence. Sound behaves strangely within Shadowbank Market. Footsteps echo softly along the alley, sometimes perfectly matching the pace of visitors, other times lingering after movement has ceased. Low whispers drift through corners and behind walls, curling around beams and doorways. Faint laughter rises and fades unpredictably, distant yet undeniably close. These sounds have no clear source, moving independently through the space, marking presence without aggression. Historical accounts of the market are sparse and fragmented. Once a bustling alley filled with traders, the market was abandoned as the city shifted and expanded. The stalls decayed, the pathways were left to shadow and moss, and the alley faded from memory. Locals speak of patterns remaining within the walls, traces of movement, attention, and routine preserved in shadow and stone. Figures, lanterns, and shifting sounds are believed to be echoes of this past, replayed for those who enter. Visitors who linger late into the night often notice distortions of space. Alleyways stretch longer than expected. Paths curve unexpectedly. Shadows bend and move independently of light. Figures appear more frequently, pacing with precision along unseen lines. Lanterns drift closer or farther than anticipated, guiding attention without force. Footsteps and whispers synchronize with visitors' own movement, creating a heightened sense of awareness without danger. One visitor described walking beneath a covered stall as a figure appeared ahead. The figure was pale, motionless, standing between shadows that stretched across walls and cobblestones. A light brush of air passed along the visitor's shoulder. Turning revealed empty alley, walls, and stalls. The figure remained for a few seconds before dissolving into darkness, leaving only the floating lantern to continue along the path. Another account tells of a small group exploring deeper into the market. Lanterns hovered above their heads, floating along the paths. Figures emerged intermittently between arches and stalls, shadows drifting independently. Footsteps echoed behind the group, matching their pace exactly. Whispers swirled around corners, brushing past without source. Each member felt the subtle presence alongside them, a quiet observation rather than threat. Despite the uncanny nature of the alley, Shadowbank Market does not feel hostile. Figures do not approach aggressively. Shadows do not strike. Lanterns do not mislead. The tension comes from awareness rather than danger. The market observes quietly, preserving echoes of human activity, allowing visitors to move freely while remaining under subtle scrutiny. As night progresses, the activity begins to subside. Lanterns slow, hovering briefly before fading. Figures appear less frequently, vanishing quickly. Shadows settle along walls and arches. Footsteps, whispers, and laughter retreat, leaving only the quiet hum of the city beyond the alley and the stillness of the market itself. By morning, Shadowbank Market returns to calm. Sunlight filters through gaps above, illuminating cobblestones and stalls. Shadows fall naturally. Lanterns and figures are gone. The alley rests, silent and undisturbed, waiting for night to awaken its hidden echoes once more. Shadowbank Market exists where memory, shadow, and stone converge. Figures pace silently along narrow paths. Lanterns float without source. Shadows glide along walls and cobblestones. Footsteps, whispers, and faint laughter trace paths of long-forgotten activity, preserved in the architecture of the alley itself. The market does not demand belief or attention. It observes quietly, guiding and recording every step of those who pass through its narrow lanes. Deadman's Hollow Market lies in a state of quiet desolation, its narrow corridors and alleys winding between rows of abandoned stalls and empty shops. The cobblestones are cracked and uneven, bearing the weight of years of neglect and long-forgotten foot traffic. By day, the market appears dormant, frozen in time, yet there is an undeniable stillness that feels almost deliberate, as if the space itself is holding its breath. The scent of aged wood and stone mingles with faint traces of smoke from past fires, lingering as an invisible reminder of history. The alleys between the stalls are tight, forcing visitors to move slowly and carefully. Shadows gather in corners and behind toppled crates, pooling across the cracked cobblestones. Each step produces a soft sound, absorbed quickly by the surrounding stillness. Even during daylight, there is a sense of isolation, as though the market is waiting for the return of those who once walked its corridors. As evening approaches, the atmosphere changes. Shadows stretch across the alleys and lean along walls of broken timber and stone. The air grows cooler, carrying the faint scent of dampness and the river that runs nearby. Light diminishes quickly, leaving dark pockets along the pathways and casting elongated silhouettes across the cobblestones. The once familiar trails and corridors become unfamiliar, warped by darkness and the weight of history. Nightfall transforms Deadman's Hollow Market completely. The corridors and alleyways become enclosed by darkness, the once visible stalls reduced to indistinct shapes. It is during these hours that unusual phenomena are most often observed. Figures are said to rise along the hallways and alleys, appearing silently among the shadows. Observers describe upright shapes, human in outline but lacking any detail. Faces, clothing, and features are indistinct. Their presence is defined by movement, subtle yet unmistakable. Some stand near stalls or corners, pausing as if observing the empty market. Others pace slowly along the corridors, tracing routes that follow the old market layout. These figures do not approach visitors directly. They maintain distance, moving with purpose along the paths of the market. Some linger briefly, turning corners before continuing. Others move continuously, retracing steps or traversing the hallways as if repeating patterns from long ago. When attention is focused on them, the figures often fade into shadow. Looking away and back again may reveal them farther along the alleys, continuing their deliberate pace, never venturing into the open streets beyond its boundaries. Soft footsteps accompany the figures, echoing across the cobblestones. The rhythm is steady and measured, as though someone is walking with intent, yet no person is visible. The footsteps move along the corridors naturally, pausing and continuing with no apparent source. Multiple sets of footsteps may be heard at once, crossing paths invisibly, further deepening the sense of a living memory embedded in the market. Whispers also drift through the alleys. Faint and indistinct, they seem to call names or carry fragments of speech. The voices are soft and ethereal, never forming complete sentences. They appear and fade unpredictably, carried through the air like fragments of the past, creating the sensation of being observed without threat. Historical accounts indicate that Deadman's Hollow Market was once a thriving center of commerce. Merchants and shoppers moved through the corridors and alleys daily, trading goods, voices, and footsteps. Fires, accidents, and gradual abandonment left the market empty but not silent. Many believe that the nighttime activity reflects these past routines, with figures, footsteps, and whispers tracing the patterns once carried out by the marketa's former occupants. Despite the eerie phenomena, the market does not feel threatening. Figures maintain distance, footsteps are measured, and whispers remain soft. Observers describe the environment as observational rather than aggressive. A space where the echoes of the past linger quietly, preserved in the stone and timber of the alleys. Sound behaves unpredictably in the tight corridors. Echoes can distort distance, making footsteps appear closer or farther than they are. Whispers shift subtly with the wind, seeming to move from one side of an alley to another. The architecture amplifies or dampens sound, creating a layered atmosphere where presence is felt more than seen. Attempts to document the phenomena are rarely successful. Photographs capture empty corridors and shadowed stalls. Video footage may show faint movement or subtle changes in light, yet the figures remain indistinct. Audio recordings pick up footsteps and whispers, but the sources are impossible to confirm. Time perception is altered in the market at night. Without daylight or familiar reference points, minutes stretch or compress unpredictably. Extended periods of silence feel prolonged, and walking through the alleys can feel like moving through layers of memory. Exiting the market often produces a sudden sense of transition, leaving the layered, enclosed environment of corridors and alleys for the openness of streets beyond. As the night progresses, activity diminishes. Figures appear less frequently, footsteps become softer, and whispers fade into the background. The market gradually returns to stillness, holding shadows, echoes, and memory quietly in place. By morning, Deadman's Hollow Market appears unchanged. Visitors often describe lasting impressions, shadows pacing along narrow alleys. Shadows pacing along narrow alleys, footsteps echoing over cobblestones. Whispers drifting softly through the corridors. Deadman's Hollow Market does not feel hostile or welcoming. It exists through memory and repetition, holding traces of past life. By day, it rests silently among abandoned stalls. By night, it becomes a stage for figures, footsteps, and whispers. Replaying the patterns left behind by those who once walked its corridors. When daylight returns fully, the market settles once more. Waiting patiently for darkness to allow figures, footsteps, and whispers to move through the narrow alleys again. Hollow Oak Market stretches along a narrow row of arches, each formed from centuries-old oak beams. The corridors beneath them twist slightly, worn by time and weather. Dust coats the wooden surfaces, and the air carries the scent of aged timber, stone, and the faint mustiness of long abandonment. The market once thrived with life. Merchants and customers filled the aisles with movement, conversation, and the exchange of goods. Over decades, activity dwindled, leaving the stalls empty and the corridors silent. The beams remain sturdy, though worn, their curves creating a sense of enclosure and continuity, as if holding memories within their grain. During the day, Hollow Oak Market feels quiet but solid. The creak of wood underfoot is amplified along the stone floor. Small birds may enter through openings, flitting between shadows and sunlight. Every step echoes softly, traveling under arches and around corners, giving the impression of presence even when alone. The paths between stalls are narrow and uneven. Old boards have warped slightly, and roots from nearby oaks press through the edges, creating gentle obstacles. Shadows cling to corners and under counters, forming shapes that appear to shift with light. Even the smallest movements seem amplified by the enclosure of the oak arches and the long, narrow corridors. As evening falls, the atmosphere begins to change. Shadows deepen along walls and floors, pooling beneath arches and stretching unnaturally across the paths. Light fades, leaving the market in muted tones, where shapes at the periphery of vision appear to twist independently. It is during this time that figures are first noticed. They move quietly among the stalls, their forms human in outline but indistinct in detail. They pause at corners or crouch behind supports, remaining still for long stretches before gliding silently along the corridors. Their presence is deliberate, almost ritualistic, retracing paths as though following a pattern from the past. The figures do not approach visitors. They remain confined to corridors and open areas between stalls. They do not interact with the wooden structures. When observed directly, they sometimes fade into shadow, only to reappear further along the corridor, continuing their silent routine. Alongside these visual phenomena, faint murmurs drift through the arches. They rise and fall unpredictably, echoing along the corridors and beneath the oak beams. The sound is low and indistinct, a mixture of whispers that cannot be fully understood. At times, murmurs seem to respond to movement, becoming clearer when observers stand still, and softening as they move along the aisles. The source of the sounds is difficult to locate. Murmurs may appear from a distant stall, then drift along the corridors. They do not follow one path, yet seem tied to specific areas, such as corners, intersections, and spaces where shadows are deepest. The effect is subtle but persistent, leaving the impression of unseen attention. Researchers studying abandoned wooden structures note that sound and perception can behave unpredictably. Echoes in long corridors, vibration through oak beams, and drafts moving through the market can create faint noises. Shadows and low light can distort perception, producing visual anomalies. Minor effects do not account for the consistency and repetition of figures and murmurs over decades. The figures and sounds follow patterns. They appear most frequently at dusk or in low-light conditions. Their pacing and position are repeated. Murmurs echo at intervals consistent with previous observations. The market seems to retain traces of past activity, replaying them subtly for those who enter. Some believe the market preserves memory. Decades of human presence, movement, and routine may have left impressions in the corridors, arches, and stalls. The figures may be echoes of past merchants or shoppers, their movements replayed silently. The murmurs may be remnants of conversations, preserved in space and atmosphere rather than memory alone. Others point to the architecture itself. The oak arches, long corridors, and enclosed structure create unique acoustic and visual effects. Shadows stretch and shift with low light. Sounds carry unevenly and unpredictably. These natural phenomena, combined with the Marquetta's history and abandonment, produce experiences that feel alive and intentional. Visitors often describe heightened awareness. Time seems slower. Distance is distorted. Every step, shadow, and sound carries significance. The market feels attentive, alive with observation, yet it does not threaten. As night deepens, activity gradually diminishes. Figures retreat into shadows. Murmurs fade, blending with the creak of boards and the movement of air through cracks in the structure. Murmurs fade, blending with the creak of boards and the movement of air through cracks in the structure. The corridors settle into quiet, though never fully empty. By morning, Hollow Oak Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates the arches and stalls. Dust rises in gentle shafts of light. Shadows shrink. Figures and murmurs vanish. Yet those who leave often carry a lingering impression. Not of fear, but of awareness. The arches retain memory. Figures may still pace silently. Murmurs may still echo through the corridors. Hollow Oak Market does not demand belief. It exists quietly, shaped by time, human presence, and the passage of history. When night falls and shadows deepen, it reveals subtle movement and faint sound, a quiet continuation of what has always been present. Among the arches, figures still move silently. Through the corridors, faint murmurs continue to drift. And when daylight returns, the market stands silent once more, holding memory, presence, and quiet echoes for those who notice its quiet persistence. Black Pine Market lies nestled at the edge of a dense forest, its entrance framed by tall pine trees that sway gently in the wind. The trunks rise straight and dark, casting long shadows across the uneven stone path that leads into the market. Moss and fallen needles cover the ground, softening footsteps and muting sound. The air is thick with the scent of pine and earth, carrying the subtle hint of moisture from the nearby woods. As visitors step beneath the canopy of trees, the market feels suspended in time. The stalls are weathered, wooden beams cracked and darkened with age. Canvas coverings sag, frayed along the edges. Shadows cling to every corner, deep and patient, shifting with the movement of mist and wind. It is among these shadows that figures begin to appear. They emerge slowly between the trees and stalls, crouched or standing partially concealed. Their outlines are human but softened by darkness and fog. They remain still, watching quietly, occupying spaces where light and shadow meet. When approached, the figures do not flee or advance. When attention shifts, they reappear, maintaining their positions along the edges of the market. Visitors often sense them before seeing anything. A cold brush traces lightly along the arm, a fleeting contact on the forearm or shoulder. Turning reveals only empty paths and stalls. The figures remain hidden among shadows. The chill lingers, fading slowly as movement continues along the stone floors. As visitors walk further, the brushes repeat. A touch near the wrist. A fleeting pass along the elbow. The sensation remains measured, restrained, never grasping or pulling. The market itself seems imbued with memory. Shadows shift subtly without wind. Canvas flaps sway gently as if stirred by unseen movement. Dust rises in soft patterns from the stone floors. Every creak of timber and settling beam seems responsive, a faint echo of activity long past. The market preserves routines and gestures in the shadows and spaces between stalls. Black Pine Market was once alive with commerce. Merchants displayed goods on wooden tables, voices called across aisles. Laughter and footsteps moved in rhythm through narrow paths. When the market was abandoned, the structures remained, absorbing echoes of movement, presence, and routine. Today, figures and cold brushes are the remnants of that history, repeating silently along the stalls and shadows. They glide between rows of stalls, moving silently along paths worn by decades of footsteps. Pale eyes begin to glow softly from within the mist, fixed and calm, illuminating only the space immediately surrounding them. The eyes do not blink or shift quickly. They observe, steady and unwavering. When fog thickens, the glow dims. When it thins, the eyes return, consistent and deliberate. Despite the eerie presence, the atmosphere is measured. The figures do not advance aggressively. Touches remain brief and precise. Shadows drift independently without threatening movement. Every element unfolds deliberately, following a quiet rhythm established long ago. Those who pause notice subtle changes. The cold brushes fade. Figures press deeper into shadows, blending with corners of stalls. Fog curls more densely along edges of timber and stone. Silence deepens, balanced and patient. The market seems to wait, observing quietly without action. When visitors resume walking, activity returns. Cold brushes pass lightly along exposed skin. Pale eyes glow softly through mist. Shadows move independently of the structural layout, shifting fluidly along aisles and corners. The market feels alive with memory, repeating routines long forgotten. Attempts to document these phenomena have produced limited clarity. Photographs capture fog and shadows but fail to define figures. Video shows vague movement and faint glowing points that vanish upon approach. Audio records only distant ambient sounds, whine through trees, faint echoes of shifting timber, and soft steps along stone floors. These factors account for some sensations but cannot explain the precision, consistency, and deliberate nature of touches, figures, and glowing eyes. As night reaches its quietest hours, activity gradually diminishes. Figures dissolve into shadows. Cold brushes cease. Pale eyes fade. Fog lifts slightly, drifting along stalls and edges of stone floors. Silence fills the space, holding only the sound of wind and distant forest. By morning, Black Pine Market appears unchanged. Sunlight filters through pine branches, illuminating worn timber, moss, and stone. Shadows retreat. Figures no longer appear. Touches have vanished. The market feels quiet, ordinary, and abandoned. Visitors leaving often pause at the entrance, glancing back along the rows of stalls. The space appears calm and unremarkable. Yet those who walked the market at night remember clearly. Figures gliding between shadows. Pale eyes glowing softly through mist. Cold hands brushing lightly along arms. The sensation of being acknowledged by the market itself. Black Pine Market remains, shaped by time, memory, and shadow. By day, it is silent and ordinary. By night, when mist drifts through pine trees and darkness settles, it becomes something else. Figures return to glide along stalls. Pale eyes glow softly. Cold hands brush lightly along passing arms. And for a brief time, the market remembers the presence it once contained, before retreating again into shadow and stillness. Ghost-like market lies hidden within a narrow district, its aisles stretching beneath high walls and arched ceilings that filter the light into soft, shifting patterns. The air carries a faint scent of aged wood, stone, and lingering traces of spices once sold along the stalls. Even during the day, the market feels dim, as though the sun itself hesitates to enter. Footsteps echo softly along the cobblestones, muted by the thick walls that enclose the passageways, creating an atmosphere that is quiet, yet alive with presence. The market is narrow, lined with stalls that were once vibrant with goods, now empty and silent. Shadows gather along corners and beneath the arches, stretching across the aisles in ways that seem deliberate. The cobblestones rise unevenly beneath each step, guiding movement along winding paths that curve gently through the enclosed space. The stillness is profound, broken only by the occasional whisper of air through cracks in the walls. As evening falls, Ghostlight Market begins to reveal its hidden nature. Lanterns appear, floating above the aisles without hand or support. Their soft glow illuminates the stalls and walkways, casting long shadows that sway gently with their movement. The lights drift along slowly, moving with purpose yet without urgency, guiding attention deeper into the market. Visitors often feel compelled to follow them, drawn forward by the gentle radiance that seems to know exactly where to appear. Figures emerge among the stalls. They stand silently, motionless, pale and indistinct, blending with shadows yet unmistakably human in shape. Pale faces appear in the shadows. They peer from behind stalls, between arches, and from gaps in the walls. Features are faint but recognizable as human. Eyes, cheekbones, and brows form briefly before dissolving back into darkness. The faces do not react or move, leaving an impression of presence that lingers even after the viewer turns away. Sound behaves unpredictably within the market. Footsteps echo softly along the aisles, sometimes perfectly mirroring visitors' own steps, sometimes slightly offset. Low, indistinct whispers drift through the space, curling around stalls and arches. Faint laughter rises at intervals, distant yet close enough to create unease. The sounds have no visible source, moving independently of human action and marking the presence of the market itself. Historical accounts of Ghostlight Market are sparse. Once a bustling hub for merchants and buyers, the market was abandoned long ago as the city expanded. Stalls decayed, paths were left to shadow and stone, and the arches fell into quiet disuse. Local legend suggests that movement, voices, and presence from the Marquetta's past became embedded in the space, preserved as figures, floating lights, and subtle sounds for those who enter today. Visitors who linger after dark report distortions of perception. Aisles seem longer than they should. Stalls appear closer or farther apart than expected. Shadows bend and stretch independently of light. Lanterns drift along paths unpredictably. Figures emerge more frequently, pacing silently along invisible lines. Footsteps and whispers follow visitors exactly, creating a heightened sense of awareness and observation without threat. A pale figure stood behind a stall, still and motionless. A faint brush of air passed along the shoulder. Turning revealed only empty aisles and silent stalls. Moments later, the figure had disappeared, and the lantern drifted onward, illuminating the path ahead. Another account tells of a small group exploring deeper aisles after dusk. Lanterns floated above, drifting slowly along the passages. Figures stood intermittently among the stalls. Shadows moved independently, brushing past without sound. Footsteps echoed behind the group in precise rhythm. Whispers circulated through arches, close yet untouchable. Each person felt the subtle presence alongside them, fleeting and intangible, aware but never threatening. Despite the haunting nature of the market, it does not feel hostile. Figures do not chase. Shadows do not strike. Lanterns do not mislead aggressively. The tension comes from observation rather than danger. The market watches quietly, preserving echoes of human activity, allowing visitors to move freely while remaining aware of unseen presence. Figures appear less frequently and vanish faster. Shadows settle along walls and stalls. Footsteps, whispers, and laughter diminish, leaving only the soft ambient sounds of the city beyond the market walls. By morning, ghost-like market returns to calm. Sunlight filters through arches and cracks, illuminating aisles and cobblestones. Shadows fall naturally. Lanterns and figures are gone. The market rests, silent and still, waiting for darkness to awaken its hidden echoes once more. Ghost-like market exists where memory, shadow, and stone converge. Figures stand silently among the stalls. Lanterns float along the aisles without hand or tether. Pale faces emerge from the shadows. Footsteps, whispers, and faint laughter mark paths of the past preserved in the architecture of the market itself. The space does not demand belief or attention. It simply observes, quietly guiding and recording the presence of those who pass through its aisles under the arches and among the shadows. Ashwood Market lies in quiet desolation, its narrow alleys winding between rows of abandoned stalls and empty shops. The cobblestone floors are cracked and uneven, worn smooth in places by years of traffic and left jagged in others by neglect. By day, the market appears frozen in time, silent and still. Sunlight filters through gaps in the rooftops and awnings, casting long shadows across empty corridors. Dust drifts lazily in the air, settling over toppled crates and broken stalls, carrying the faint scent of aged wood and stone. The alleys are narrow and confining, forcing visitors to move slowly along uneven floors. Shadows pool along corners, around broken carts, and beneath the remaining structures of the stalls. Each step produces a soft sound, absorbed quickly by the quiet. Even during daylight, the market carries an eerie sense of isolation, as if the space is holding its breath and waiting for the return of those who once walked its corridors. As evening approaches, the atmosphere shifts. Shadows stretch and deepen along the cobblestones, leaning against walls and warped wooden frames. The air grows cooler, heavier, and carries the faint scent of dust and lingering wood smoke from the past. Light diminishes rapidly, leaving patches of alleyway in near-total darkness, making familiar paths appear unfamiliar. Night transforms Ashwood Market into a space that feels alive, despite the absence of people. Figures begin to appear along the corridors and alleyways. Observers describe upright shapes rising from corners and shadows, human in outline but without distinguishing features. Faces and clothing are indistinct, leaving only the impression of presence. These figures move deliberately along the alleys. Some trace the lines of the old market, moving slowly between stalls and doorways. Others pause at corners or intersections before continuing. Their movement feels purposeful, as if replaying patterns etched into the market long ago. When attention is directed toward them, the figures often fade into shadow. Looking away and back again may reveal them farther along the alleys. Repeating the same slow, deliberate motion. They remain tethered to the Marquetta-esque structure, never venturing beyond the corridors and paths that define it. Accompanying these figures are soft footsteps echoing across the empty floors. The rhythm is steady and calm, moving naturally along the cobblestones. Footsteps may travel past broken stalls and toppled crates, fading as they pass, leaving no visible source. Occasionally, multiple sets of footsteps can be heard at once, overlapping without explanation, amplifying the sense of memory embedded in the market. Whispers are also reported. They are faint, indistinct, and carried softly along the corridors. Names are called, fragments of sentences drift, but coherence is rare. The whispers appear to acknowledge the presence of visitors without threatening them, rising and falling unpredictably. They seem tied to the figures, yet also independent, like echoes preserved in the structure itself. Historical records indicate that Ashwood Market was once a vibrant center of commerce. Merchants and shoppers filled the alleys with movement, voices, and light from lanterns. Fires and accidents led to gradual abandonment, leaving the market frozen in decay. Many believe the nighttime figures and sounds reflect this history, tracing the movements of those who once lived and worked here, replaying moments long since past. Despite the eerie phenomena, the market does not feel hostile. Figures remain at a distance. Figures remain at a distance. Footsteps are calm and measured. Whispers are quiet and sporadic. Observers describe the experience as being watched rather than pursued. A sense of witnessing memory replay itself rather than encountering threat. Sound behaves unpredictably in the narrow alleys. Footsteps and whispers may appear closer or farther than they actually are. Shadows stretch and shift along the walls. The architecture amplifies or dampens sound, layering each echo, footfall, and breath with a subtle intensity that heightens awareness of the space. Attempts to document these phenomena are rarely successful. Photographs show empty alleys and shadows. Video footage may capture faint movement or flickers of light among stalls. Audio recordings pick up footsteps and whispers, yet sources cannot be verified. Time perception is altered at night. Without daylight or familiar reference points, minutes stretch or compress. Silence feels weighty. And walking through the corridors can feel like moving through layers of history. Exiting the market produces a sudden transition. Leaving the layered, enclosed environment of shadow and echo for the open streets beyond. As the night progresses, activity diminishes. Figures appear less frequently, footsteps become softer, and whispers fade. The market gradually returns to stillness, its cobblestone floors and broken stalls quiet once more. By morning, Ashwood Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates cracks in the floors, dust-covered surfaces, and the skeletal remains of stalls. No visible sign remains of figures, footsteps, or whispers from the night before, only the memory carried by those who walked its corridors after dark. Visitors often describe lasting impressions, shadows gliding along alleyways, footsteps echoing across empty floors, whispers drifting softly through the dark. Ashwood Market does not feel hostile or welcoming. By day, it rests quietly among abandoned stalls and empty paths. By night, it becomes a stage for movement, sound, and presence, replaying patterns left behind by those who once walked its alleys. When daylight returns fully, the market settles into stillness once more, waiting patiently for darkness to allow figures, footsteps, and whispers to move through the corridors again. Widowmaker Market stretches along a long, narrow corridor, once filled with the bustle of merchants and townsfolk. The market earned its reputation through multiple disappearances. Over the years, visitors entered the corridors and never returned. Belongings were left behind, stalls remained stocked, yet those who vanished left no trace. Stories passed quietly through the town, whispering of absence, of a space that holds memory and presence beyond the ordinary. Sunlight filters through broken windows and gaps in the roof, casting long, uneven shadows along the floors. The corridors echo faintly underfoot, the sound of movement amplified by the enclosed space. Small birds occasionally enter through openings, their soft calls adding motion to the stillness, yet the air remains heavy with quiet and history. The pathways between stalls are narrow and uneven. Boards creak beneath footsteps, stones shift slightly, and shadows stretch along walls and under counters. Every corner seems deeper than it should be, every turn carrying the weight of past activity. The layout of the market, once designed for trade and passage, now emphasizes isolation, giving the impression that space itself observes those who enter. As evening approaches, the atmosphere shifts. Light diminishes rapidly, leaving the corridors cloaked in muted tones. Shadows lengthen and pool beneath the stalls. The air grows cooler and heavier. The stillness thickens, carrying with it a subtle awareness of movement that is not your own. It is at this time that figures are first noticed. They appear suddenly between the stalls, partially hidden in shadow. Human in outline but lacking clear features, they pause, glance silently across the corridors, and then continue along paths that seem familiar, retracing steps without deviation. Their movement is deliberate, measured, almost ritualistic. The figures do not approach visitors. They remain confined to the spaces between stalls, moving silently and deliberately. When observed directly, they sometimes vanish, dissolving into shadows or around corners, only to reappear further along the same path, continuing their silent routine. Alongside these visual encounters come sounds that defy easy explanation. Soft cries drift through the corridors, distant yet persistent. They rise and fall unpredictably, echoing from wall to wall, lingering in corners. Whispers thread along the paths, fragmented and indistinct, carrying as though the building itself were speaking. The combination of cries and murmurs creates an unmistakable sense of presence. The sounds are difficult to locate. A cry may appear near one stall, then fade and reappear across the corridor. Whispers drift from corner to corner, passing without apparent source. Researchers studying abandoned markets and enclosed spaces note that sound and perception can behave unpredictably. Corridors amplify echoes. Drafts moving through gaps carry noise in unexpected directions. Shadows can distort shapes. While these factors explain minor phenomena, they do not account for the consistent repetition of figures and sounds reported over decades. Appearances occur most frequently in the evening or during low-light conditions. The pacing along paths is repeated, echoing movement that once occurred. Cries and whispers recur under similar conditions, suggesting that the market retains traces of activity frozen in time. Some believe the market preserves memory. Years of human presence and repeated routines may have left residual impressions. Figures may be echoes of merchants and customers, footsteps retraced silently. Others point to architecture and environment. Wood, stone, and narrow corridors create unique acoustics and visual distortions. Shadows stretch and twist with minimal light. Dust and drafts amplify movement and sound. The structure itself becomes a medium through which perception is heightened, making the market feel alive and attentive. Visitors often describe a heightened sense of awareness. Time seems slowed. Distances feel altered. Every step, sound, and shadow carries weight. The market feels alive with observation, though not hostile. As night deepens, activity gradually diminishes. Figures retreat into corners and shadows. Cries fade into the distance. Whispers thin and blend with the ambient sounds of the building. The corridors settle into quiet, though the space is never fully empty. By morning, Widowmaker Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Cries and whispers leave no trace. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Cries and whispers leave no trace. Yet those who depart often carry a lingering impression. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Cries and whispers leave no trace. Yet those who depart often carry a lingering impression. Not of fear, but awareness. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Cries and whispers leave no trace. Yet those who depart often carry a lingering impression. Not of fear, but awareness. The corridors retain memory. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Cries and whispers leave no trace. Yet those who depart often carry a lingering impression. Not of fear, but awareness. The corridors retain memory. Figures may still pace silently between stalls. Sunlight illuminates corridors and stalls. Dust floats in gentle beams of light. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Cries and whispers leave no trace. Yet those who depart often carry a lingering impression. Not of fear, but awareness. The corridors retain memory. Figures may still pace silently between stalls. Cries and whispers continue to drift along paths. Widowmaker Market does not demand belief. It exists quietly, shaped by history, structure, and time. When darkness falls and shadows deepen, it reveals subtle movement and sound. A quiet continuation of what has always been present. Between the stalls, figures still appear. Through the corridors, cries and whispers continue to drift. And when daylight returns, the market stands silent once more. Holding memory, presence, and quiet echoes for those who notice its subtle persistence. Misty Pines Market stretches through narrow corridors, its stalls long abandoned and weathered by time and the elements. Fog rolls slowly along the stone floors, curling around wooden beams and tables, softening edges and muting sound. The air is cool and heavy, carrying the scent of damp wood, pine, and lingering dust. Shadows gather beneath the sagging stalls, stretching across pathways that twist and narrow, making the market seem larger than it is. As visitors step into the corridors, the atmosphere changes. The echoes of footsteps bounce off stone and timber, swallowed almost immediately by the fog. It is among these shadows and fog that figures begin to appear. They glide silently along the aisles, moving between stalls without sound or weight. Their outlines are human but indistinct, softened by mist and darkness. They do not step fully onto the pathways. They remain in the spaces between stalls, their movements smooth and measured. When observed directly, they seem to dissolve slightly into the fog. When attention shifts, they reappear, continuing their quiet glide along familiar paths. Visitors often sense these figures before seeing them. A light brush touches the arm. Fingers trace briefly along the forearm or shoulder, cold and deliberate. The sensation is fleeting yet unmistakable. It does not resemble the movement of air or fog. The chill lingers, fading slowly before dissipating entirely. As visitors move deeper into the market, the brushes repeat. A fleeting touch along the wrist. A brief pass at the elbow. The sensations are consistent but restrained, precise, and never threatening. The market itself seems alive with memory. Shadows stretch and shift without wind. Mist curls subtly around corners and under tables. Dust rises in soft patterns from the stone floors. Every creak of timber and settling of stone carries a faint echo of past activity. The corridors preserve movement and presence, replaying routines that once filled the space with life. Misty Pines Market was once bustling. Merchants displayed goods on tables, voices called across aisles, and footsteps moved rhythmically along narrow paths. When abandoned, the structures remained, absorbing memory of movement, gestures, and attention. Today, figures and touches are remnants of that history, quietly repeating patterns in shadow, fog, and stone. As night deepens, the activity becomes more pronounced. Figures glide along multiple aisles at once, moving silently and deliberately. Pale eyes emerge faintly through the mist, fixed and calm, illuminating only the immediate space around them. When fog thickens, the glow dims. When it thins, the eyes return, steady and consistent. Despite the unsettling nature of these phenomena, the atmosphere is controlled. Figures do not approach aggressively. Touches remain brief and precise. Shadows drift independently but do not interfere. Everything unfolds slowly, deliberately, following a quiet rhythm embedded in the corridors themselves. Those who pause notice subtle changes. The brushes of cold fade. Silence becomes heavier, patient and attentive, as though the market itself is observing without motion. When movement resumes, activity returns. Figures glide silently along the aisles once more. Cold brushes occur along exposed skin. Pale eyes glow softly through fog. Shadows shift independently of walls and stalls. The market feels alive with memory, replaying routines long forgotten. Attempts to document these occurrences have produced limited clarity. Photographs capture mist and shadows but cannot define figures. Video shows drifting shapes and faint points of light that vanish when approached. Audio records only ambient sounds, faint echoes, soft creaks of timber, and subtle movement along stone floors. Environmental explanations suggest low light, fog, and damp corridors enhance perception. Shadows and mist may distort vision. These explanations account for some experiences but not the precision, consistency, or deliberate nature of figures, brushes, and glowing eyes. As night reaches its quietest hours, activity diminishes. Figures dissolve into shadow and fog. Cold brushes stop. Pale eyes fade. Mist lifts slightly, drifting toward corners and aisles. Silence fills the market, holding only distant echoes of movement and settling structures. By morning, Misty Pines Market appears unchanged. Sunlight filters through gaps in stalls and beams, illuminating stone floors and weathered wood. Shadows retreat. Figures no longer appear. Touches vanish. The market feels quiet, ordinary, and abandoned. Visitors leaving often pause at the corridor entrances, glancing back. The market seems calm and unremarkable. Yet those who walked its aisles at night remember clearly. Figures gliding silently between stalls. Pale eyes glowing through mist. Cold hands brushing lightly along skin. The sense of being acknowledged by the market itself. Misty Pines Market remains shaped by fog, memory, and time. By day, it is silent and ordinary. By night, when mist drifts through the corridors and shadows deepen, it becomes something else. Figures return to glide along aisles. Pale eyes glow softly. Unseen hands brush lightly along passing arms. And for a brief time, the market remembers the presence it once contained before retreating again into shadow and stillness. Blackroot Market stretches along narrow alleys, framed by wooden beams that rise overhead, darkened and blackened by age and dim lighting. The market feels enclosed, its paths winding between stalls and archways that once held goods and voices, now silent and still. The air carries the faint scent of aged wood, dust, and lingering traces of herbs and spices long forgotten. Even during the day, the space feels shaded and quiet, removed from the bustle of the city beyond. Footsteps echo softly along the cobblestones, muted by the thick walls, creating a sensation of isolation and anticipation. The aisles are narrow and uneven, lined with decaying stalls and worn wooden boards. Shadows gather along corners and beneath beams, stretching unnaturally across the ground. The market seems to breathe, the silence heavy with unspoken memory, holding centuries of movement, voices, and human presence within its walls. As evening descends, Black Root Market begins to reveal its hidden nature. Figures emerge briefly from the shadows, appearing near stalls, behind beams, or between arches. Their forms are pale, indistinct, and soft-edged, blurred by the dim light. They move silently, pacing along paths in patterns that are deliberate yet inexplicable. They do not approach visitors. They do not gesture or speak. Observers find that looking directly at them often causes the figures to fade, while glancing away allows them to persist, pacing or standing along invisible routes. Visitors often sense a presence brushing past them. It is light and fleeting, passing along the shoulder or arm without warning. The feeling is brief, never lingering, yet undeniably perceptible. Turning around reveals empty aisles and stalls, shadows that stretch and shift, and the faintly glowing outlines of the wooden beams. The market itself seems aware of every step and movement, its presence subtle but constant. Soft chanting drifts through the alleys. The sound is low and layered, carried on the wind that moves silently through the market. It is unrecognizable as words, a rhythm and tone that rises and falls without source. Some visitors hear it clearly. Others feel it as a vibration in the chest, subtle but persistent. The chanting does not respond to attention. It neither grows louder nor diminishes when acknowledged. It exists as part of the market itself, threading through the stalls, beams, and shadows. Their surfaces reflect faint glimmers from lanterns that float without hand or tether, drifting along aisles and casting illumination on stalls, walls, and cobblestones. The lanterns swing gently, highlighting the figures and the depth of the space. They move slowly, deliberately, guiding attention along paths long abandoned but preserved in memory and shadow. Visitors often feel drawn to follow them, moving deeper into the market without realizing how far they have traveled. Historical records of Black Root Market are scarce. Once a thriving hub for merchants, traders, and buyers, the market fell into abandonment as the city evolved. Stalls decayed, paths became overgrown, and wooden beams darkened with age. Legends suggest that movement, sound, and human presence became embedded in the market itself. The figures, the floating lanterns, and the chanting are believed to be echoes of the past, preserved within the architecture, waiting to replay for anyone who enters. Visitors who linger after dark report a distortion of perception. Aisles feel longer than expected. Corners appear to shift. Shadows bend independently of light. Figures emerge repeatedly, pacing along paths that seem unfamiliar. Lanterns float closer or farther than logic suggests, guiding attention subtly. Footsteps and whispers synchronize with visitors' movements, creating heightened awareness without direct interaction. A pale figure appeared briefly behind a collapsed stall, standing silently. Shadows stretched across the floor and walls. The visitor felt a fleeting brush against the shoulder. Turning revealed only empty stalls and darkened aisles. The figure vanished moments later. Another account tells of a small group exploring deeper into the market. Lanterns floated above their heads, drifting along the aisles. Figures appeared intermittently, standing silently among the stalls. Shadows moved independently, brushing past without sound. Footsteps echoed behind the group in precise rhythm. Whispers weaved through the aisles, close yet untouchable. Each person felt the subtle presence at their side, fleeting, intangible, and aware. Despite its haunting nature, Black Root Market does not feel hostile. Figures do not chase. Shadows do not strike. Lanterns do not mislead aggressively. The tension arises from observation rather than threat. The market watches, preserving echoes of human activity, allowing visitors to move freely while remaining aware of unseen presences. As night progresses, activity gradually diminishes. Lanterns hover briefly before fading. Figures appear less frequently, vanishing faster. Shadows settle along walls and cobblestones. Footsteps, whispers, and chanting retreat, leaving only the quiet hum of the city beyond the walls. By morning, Blackroot Market returns to stillness. Sunlight filters through gaps above the aisles, illuminating stalls, floors, and wooden beams. Shadows fall naturally. Lanterns and figures are gone. The market rests, silent and undisturbed, waiting for darkness to awaken its hidden echoes once more. Blackroot Market exists where memory, shadow, and structure converge. Figures emerge briefly and vanish. Lanterns float along the aisles without hand or tether. Pale faces appear in the shadows. Faint chanting threads through the market. The market does not demand attention or belief. It observes quietly, recording and guiding the presence of anyone who walks along its aisles. Carrying echoes of the past into the present. Hollowbrook Market rests quietly along the banks of a small stream that runs beneath parts of its structure. The wooden bridges spanning the water are weathered and worn, some planks cracked or missing entirely. By day, sunlight filters through gaps in the remaining roofs and overhead beams, illuminating the narrow alleys and casting long, fractured shadows along the floors. The air is cool and carries a subtle mixture of damp wood, stone, and the faint scent of flowing water. The market is abandoned, the stalls empty and broken, their frames splintered and leaning. Pathways are narrow and winding, forcing careful steps along uneven surfaces. Debris and toppled crates litter the alleys, and moss grows along the edges of bridges and planks. Each step produces a soft sound that is quickly absorbed by the surrounding quiet, emphasizing the stillness that dominates the space. As evening approaches, shadows lengthen and deepen along the alleys and bridges. The air grows cooler, and the sound of the stream becomes more pronounced, echoing softly beneath the wooden structures. The narrow paths take on a more foreboding quality, and the once familiar layout begins to feel unpredictable in the dim light. Nightfall transforms Hollowbrook Market completely. The narrow bridges and alleyways are cloaked in darkness. And the sound of running water beneath the planks carries with an eerie clarity. It is during these hours that unusual activity is most frequently reported. Figures appear along the bridges, moving slowly and deliberately. Observers describe upright shapes, human in outline but lacking detail. Faces, clothing, and other features are indistinct. Their presence is defined entirely by motion. Some pace along the narrow bridges, others move along the alleys beside the stream, gliding silently. As if retracing paths that were once familiar. These figures do not approach visitors directly, maintaining distance while moving deliberately through the market. Some pause near corners or intersections of the alleys, lingering briefly before continuing. Others follow the wooden bridges, their motion consistent, as though walking along routes embedded in the market long ago. When attention is focused on the figures, they often fade into shadow. Looking away and back again may reveal them farther along the market, continuing the same deliberate movement. They remain tethered to the paths, never straying beyond the structure of the abandoned market and the edges of the stream. Soft footsteps are often heard accompanying the figures. The rhythm of the footsteps is calm, moving naturally across the worn wood and stone. Occasionally, multiple sets of footsteps can be heard simultaneously, crisscrossing the market without visible origin. The stream adds its own presence to the night. The water flows quietly beneath the bridges, amplifying or masking the sound of footsteps, creating a layered auditory experience. Whispers are also reported by visitors. They are soft and indistinct, carried lightly along the air of the alleys and across the water. They are soft and indistinct, carried lightly along the air of the alleys and across the water. Names are called faintly, and fragments of speech drift, never forming complete sentences. The voices appear to acknowledge presence without threatening it, appearing and fading unpredictably with the wind and shadows. Appearing and fading unpredictably with the wind and shadows. Historical accounts reveal that Hollowbrook Market was once a hub of trade and daily activity. The wooden bridges were constructed to navigate the stream safely, connecting the stalls along the narrow alleys. Accidents and abandonment gradually silenced the market, leaving it to decay while preserving echoes of the past. Many believe the nighttime figures, footsteps, and whispers are remnants of this history, replaying patterns established long ago. Despite the unusual activity, the market does not feel hostile. Whispers shift with the wind, seemingly moving from one side of the market to another. The stream and bridges amplify, distort, and layer sound, heightening awareness and creating a sense of presence without revealing any source. Attempts to document these phenomena are rarely successful. Photographs capture empty alleys, broken stalls, and darkened bridges. Video footage may reveal faint movement or glimmers of light, but the figures remain indistinct. Audio recordings often capture footsteps and whispers, yet the sources cannot be confirmed. Time perception is altered in the market at night. Without daylight, minutes stretch or compress unpredictably. Extended periods of silence feel prolonged. And walking through the narrow alleys and bridges can feel like moving through both space and history. Exiting the market produces a sudden transition. Returning observers to open ground beyond the stream. As the night progresses, activity diminishes. Figures appear less frequently, footsteps grow softer, and whispers fade. The market gradually returns to stillness, holding its shadows, echoes, and memory quietly in place. By morning, Hollowbrook Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates the broken wood, stone floors, and narrow alleys. No visible traces remain of figures, footsteps, or whispers from the night before. Only the lingering impression carried by those who experienced it. Visitors often describe lasting images, shadows gliding along the bridges, soft footsteps echoing through the narrow alleys, whispers drifting softly across the stream. Hollowbrook Market does not feel hostile or welcoming. It exists through memory and repetition. By night, it becomes a stage for figures, footsteps, and whispers, replaying patterns left behind by those who once walked its paths. When daylight returns fully, the market settles into stillness once more, waiting patiently for darkness to allow figures, footsteps, and whispers to move across the alleys and bridges once again. Blood Willow Market lies at the edge of an old district, a network of narrow alleyways lined with stalls and aged wooden structures. Willow trees grow along the paths, their branches sweeping low and brushing against walls and rooftops. Even in still air, the willows sway unnaturally, their shadows twisting along the alleyways and across the cobblestone floors. The market is long abandoned, yet it is far from empty. During the day, Blood Willow Market appears quiet but solid. Sunlight filters through gaps between branches and stalls, casting uneven patterns along the alleys. Dust and dry leaves cover surfaces, and the scent of aged wood and damp earth lingers in the air. Occasional birds flutter through openings, their calls sharp in the stillness. The market feels contained, each corridor framed by the low-hanging willow branches, emphasizing isolation. The alleyways wind through the stalls, narrow and uneven. Roots from the willows press through cracks in the ground, forcing visitors to navigate carefully. As evening approaches, the atmosphere shifts. Light fades quickly, and the alleyways grow dim. Shadows stretch along walls and floors, twisting unnaturally. The air cools and becomes heavier, carrying the subtle hum of the willow's movement. The market seems to contract around its paths, enclosing itself in silence that is almost palpable. It is during this time that figures are first noticed. They crouch in corners, partially obscured by shadows or behind wooden supports. Their forms are human in outline but lack distinct features, blending seamlessly with the environment. They remain still for long stretches, observing the alleyways and the paths that wind through the market, before moving silently along familiar routes. They do not approach visitors. They remain confined to corners and open areas between stalls. When directly observed, they sometimes fade into shadow or disappear behind willow branches, only to reappear farther along the alleyways, continuing their deliberate movement. Alongside these visual phenomena, sounds emerge. Soft whispers drift through the corridors, fragmented and indistinct, moving between stalls and around corners. Gentle laughter follows, light and fleeting, carried along the paths without a discernible source. The combination of whispers and laughter creates a pervasive sense of presence, subtle yet unmistakable. The sounds are difficult to locate. A whisper may seem to come from one stall, then drift to another. Laughter may echo down a distant alley, fading and returning unpredictably. Movement along the pathways does not diminish the sounds, yet stillness often makes them more pronounced, enhancing the sense of being observed. Researchers studying abandoned marketplaces note that sound and perception can behave unpredictably. Enclosed corridors amplify echoes. Uneven surfaces and wooden beams carry vibrations. Low light and shadows can distort perception. While these factors explain minor effects, they do not account for the consistent reports of figures and repeated auditory phenomena over decades. The figures and sounds follow patterns. They appear most frequently in the evening or under low-light conditions. Figures retrace paths in recognizable loops. Whispers and laughter recur in the same locations and under similar conditions, suggesting that the market retains traces of activity frozen in time. Some believe the market preserves memory. Decades of human presence, routines, and movement may have left residual impressions. Figures may represent habits frozen in the past, replayed silently. Whispers and laughter may echo the voices of those who once moved along the alleyways, preserved subtly in space and atmosphere. Others point to environmental factors. The interaction of willow branches, roots, alleys, and wooden structures creates unique visual and acoustic conditions. Shadows twist unpredictably. Sounds carry and reflect in ways that enhance perception. These natural effects, combined with the market's abandonment and history, produce experiences that feel alive and deliberate. Visitors often describe heightened awareness. Time seems slowed. Distances appear distorted. Every step, shadow, and sound carries weight. The market feels attentive, alive with observation yet not threatening. As night deepens, activity gradually diminishes. Figures retreat into corners and shadowed areas. Whispers thin, and laughter drifts farther along the alleyways. The market settles into quiet, though it is never fully empty. By morning, Blood Willow Market appears unchanged. Sunlight illuminates alleyways and stalls. Dust floats in the air. Shadows shrink. Figures vanish. Whispers and laughter leave no trace. Yet those who leave often carry a lingering impression. Not of fear, but awareness. The alleyways, willow branches, and stalls retain memory. Figures may still crouch silently in corners. Whispers and laughter may still drift along the paths. Blood Willow Market does not demand belief. It exists quietly, shaped by history, nature, and time. When night falls and shadows deepen, it reveals subtle movement and sound, a continuation of what has always been present. Among the alleyways, figures still crouch. Through the corridors, whispers and soft laughter continue to drift. And when daylight returns, the market stands silent once more, holding memory, presence, and quiet persistence for those who notice its subtle life. Phantom Creek Market stretches through narrow corridors, its stalls worn and weathered by decades of exposure to wind and rain. Stone floors are cracked and uneven, moss growing in crevices, softening each step. The air is thick with the scent of damp wood, aged stone, and the faint tang of lingering fog. Shadows cling to the corners of the market, stretching across the aisles and twisting along the edges of timber and stone. As night falls, the atmosphere shifts. Soft pools of light appear along the corridors without source. Lanterns glow steadily, illuminating small sections of the stone floors and surrounding stalls. There are no wires, no holders, no one carrying them. The glow moves subtly, as if aware of the layout and the presence of those walking beneath it. Figures begin to appear among the stalls. They rise slowly from shadowed corners, gliding silently along aisles and between tables. Their forms are human in outline but softened by darkness and fog. They do not step fully onto the main pathways. They remain tucked between stalls, moving in measured, deliberate ways. When observed, they seem to dissolve into the shadows. When attention shifts, they reappear, continuing along paths that feel familiar to them. A cold brush touches the arm, brief and precise along the forearm or shoulder. The chill spreads slowly before fading. It does not resemble wind, moisture, or passing branches. The sensation of touch lingers, fading gradually as movement continues. As visitors move further along the corridors, the brushes repeat. A fleeting pass along the wrist. A subtle touch near the elbow. The cold is measured and restrained, never grasping, never threatening. The market itself seems alive with memory. Shadows shift even without wind. Fog curls around corners and under tables, moving subtly in response to presence. Dust rises softly from stone floors. Every creak of timber, every settling of the old stone, carries echoes of activity long gone. The market preserves these routines and gestures, replaying them silently in fog, shadow, and light. Phantom Creek Market was once a hub of trade. Merchants displayed goods on wooden tables. Voices called across narrow aisles. Footsteps and laughter moved in rhythm along the corridors. When abandoned, the structures remained, absorbing memory of presence, movement, and attention. Today, figures and cold brushes are remnants of that history, quietly repeating routines among the stalls. As night deepens, the activity becomes more pronounced. Figures appear more frequently along multiple aisles. They glide silently, moving smoothly between stalls. Pale eyes begin to glow faintly from within the mist, fixed and steady, illuminating only the area immediately surrounding them. They observe quietly. When the fog thickens, the glow dims slightly. When it thins, the eyes return, calm and consistent. Figures do not advance aggressively. Touches remain brief and precise. Shadows drift independently, moving without obstruction but never threatening. Every movement unfolds slowly and deliberately, as though following a rhythm embedded in the structure itself. Those who pause notice subtle changes. Cold brushes fade. Figures retreat deeper into corners and shadows. Fog curls more densely around edges of stone and timber. Silence deepens, patient and attentive, as though the market is observing without action. When visitors resume movement, activity returns. Figures glide silently along the aisles once more. Cold brushes occur along exposed skin. Pale eyes glow softly through fog. Shadows move independently of walls and stalls, tracing paths that feel purposeful but without intent to harm. The market seems alive with memory, replaying routines long abandoned. Attempts to document these phenomena have produced limited results. Photographs capture mist and vague shadows but fail to define the figures. Video records show drifting shapes and faint glowing points that vanish when approached. Audio captures only ambient sounds, distant echoes, settling timber, and the soft hum of movement along stone floors. Environmental explanations suggest low light, fog, and moisture enhance perception. Shadows and mist may distort vision. These explanations account for some sensations but do not explain the precision, repetition, or deliberate nature of touches, figures, and glowing eyes. As night reaches its quietest hours, activity diminishes. Figures fade into fog and shadow. Cold brushes stop. Pale eyes disappear. Fog lifts slightly, drifting along aisles and corners. By morning, Phantom Creek Market appears unchanged. Sunlight filters through gaps in timber and stone, illuminating stalls and floors. Shadows retreat. Figures no longer appear. Touches have vanished. The market feels quiet, ordinary, and abandoned. Visitors leaving often pause at the entrances, glancing back along the corridors. The space seems calm and unremarkable. Yet those who walked the aisles at night remember clearly. Figures gliding silently between stalls. Pale eyes glowing through fog. Cold hands brushing lightly along skin. The sensation of being acknowledged by the market itself. Phantom Creek Market remains, shaped by fog, memory, and time. By day, it is silent and ordinary. By night, when mist drifts and shadows deepen, it becomes something else. Figures return to glide along the aisles. Pale eyes glow softly. Unseen hands brush lightly along passing arms. And for a brief time, the market remembers the presence it once contained. Before retreating again into shadow and stillness. Darkwater Market stretches deep into a maze of narrow corridors, lined with stalls that have long since fallen silent. The wooden beams above are blackened by age, absorbing light and sound. The air carries the faint scent of dust, old wood, and remnants of spices once sold here. Even during the day, the market feels removed from the city beyond, quiet yet charged with a presence that seems aware of every step taken along its alleys. The corridors twist and turn, narrow and uneven, guiding visitors along paths that feel longer than they should. The market is enclosed, walls rising high on either side, creating a sense of isolation. Footsteps echo faintly, but the sound does not behave as expected. Occasionally, it seems to match the pace of visitors, only to fade or return slightly offset, as if the market itself is mirroring each step. As night falls, Darkwater Market begins to reveal its haunted nature. Figures rise silently along the corridors and among the stalls. They are pale and indistinct, their outlines softened by shadow. They do not approach, speak, or acknowledge those who pass. They move slowly, pacing along invisible paths, sometimes appearing at the edge of vision before fading into darkness. Looking directly at them often causes them to vanish, while glancing away allows them to linger, tracing the paths they once walked. Ghostly lanterns appear above the paths. They float without hand or support, casting a steady, soft light that illuminates sections of corridors and stalls. Their glow highlights the worn wood, cobblestones, and shadows stretching across the walls. Some are drawn to follow them, compelled by the quiet radiance and the sense that the lights know the paths better than they do. The market itself seems alive. It seems alive. Visitors report feeling a presence brushing past them. A shoulder, an arm, or a back may feel a light touch, fleeting and cool. Never lingering long enough to alarm. Turning reveals nothing but shadowed walls and empty stalls. The sensation is subtle, yet persistent, a reminder that the market watches, guiding the unwary along corridors and around corners. Sound behaves unpredictably here. A reminder that the market watches, guiding the unwary along corridors and around corners. Footsteps echo along aisles and corridors, sometimes perfectly matching a visitora's own pace. Low whispers drift through the space, curling around walls and arches, fading and returning in patterns that are impossible to locate. Faint cries rise at intervals, distant yet close enough to unsettle. Historical accounts suggest the market was once a bustling place. Merchants lined the corridors with stalls of cloth, spices, and trinkets. The market was a hub of activity, voices and footsteps filling the alleys. Over time, it was abandoned, the city above changing and growing while the market fell silent. Legend suggests that patterns of movement, attention, and human presence became embedded in the market itself. The figures, lanterns, and sounds are echoes of the past, preserved and replayed for those who enter. Visitors who stay late into the night often report distortions of perception. Corridors seem longer than expected. Paths twist unpredictably. Shadows bend independently of light sources. Figures appear repeatedly, pacing along paths unseen. Lanterns drift closer or farther than logic allows. Footsteps and whispers follow visitors precisely, heightening awareness. Creating the impression that the market itself is aware of their presence. One visitor described walking down a narrow aisle beneath a floating lantern. A pale figure appeared beside a collapsed stall, standing motionless. Shadows stretched across the cobblestones and walls. A fleeting brush of air passed along the shoulder. Turning revealed only empty stalls and shadowed corridors. The figure dissolved moments later, leaving the lantern to continue along its path, illuminating the way. Another account tells of a small group exploring deeper corridors. Lanterns floated above, drifting along the aisles. Figures appeared intermittently among stalls. Shadows shifted independently, brushing past without sound. Footsteps echoed behind the group in precise rhythm. Whispers weaved through corners, close yet intangible. Each person felt the subtle presence alongside them, fleeting, intangible, and aware, never threatening. The market watches quietly, preserving the echoes of human activity and guiding visitors through its winding paths. As the night deepens, activity gradually fades. Figures appear less frequently and dissolve more quickly. Shadows settle along walls and floors. Footsteps, whispers, and faint cries recede, leaving only the quiet hum of the city beyond and the stillness of the market itself. By morning, Darkwater Market returns to calm. Sunlight filters through gaps above, illuminating the corridors and stalls. Shadows fall naturally. Lanterns and figures are gone. The market rests, silent and still, waiting for darkness to awaken its hidden echoes once more. Darkwater Market exists where memory, shadow, and presence converge. Figures rise silently along corridors and stalls. Ghostly lanterns float above the paths. Shadows glide along the aisles. Shadows glide along the aisles. Footsteps, whispers, and faint cries mark the passage of past and present. Footsteps, whispers, and faint cries mark the passage of past and present. The market does not demand attention or belief. The market does not demand attention or belief. It observes, quietly guiding and recording the movements of anyone who walks through its haunted alleys. It observes, quietly guiding and recording the movements of anyone who walks through its haunted alleys. Carrying the echoes of history into the night. Thank you, my dear friend, for walking with me tonight through the haunted historic marketplaces of New York. These marketplaces may seem quiet by day, but by night they are alive with shadows, whispers, and spirits that refuse to rest. If you ever wander through an abandoned market at night, and fog drifts low, or shadows move among the stalls, or lanterns appear floating above the corridors, remember this. Not every shadow is harmless. Not every path is safe. And not every figure belongs to the world of the living. Walk carefully. Keep your lanterns close. And may the spirits of the marketplaces leave You. To. Return. Safely. Until. Our. Next. Haunted. Journey. My. Dear. Friend. 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 Until. Our. Next. Haunted. Journey.